In the period of some 60 years, Japan had emerged from isolation to become a world power. Her population had doubled in that period and was still increasing at the tremendous rate of about 900,000 a year. But Japan's prosperity was fragile. The country lacked important raw materials like iron, coal, oil, which had to be imported. To pay for this, Japan had to export or die. The world slump proved a cruel blow.
When the Great Crash came and Japanese goods were discriminated against and Japan suffered much more severely than other economies from the collapse of world trade, the Japanese became extremely resentful. They tried their best to play the system by the rules, and now they felt the rules were loaded against them. So the economic catastrophe pushed the Japanese to a much more aggressively nationalistic position in the early 1930s.
Japan felt it essential to find new markets for trade and new sources of raw materials. Her eyes turned towards China.
China is people, 450 million of them. If the whole population of China were to walk past you, four abreast, there would never be an end to the procession, for new Chinese would be born and would grow up before the last man could pass by. Of every 5 persons on the face of the earth, 1 is a Chinese.
But if China's population was large, the country was a ripe target for the aggressive Japanese.
China was essentially in a state of chaos by the late 1920s. Competition between the nationalist Chinese on the one hand, the communists on the other, and provincial warlords who were able to establish their own rule over large areas of China, independent of the Chinese government, had produced a situation by the late 1920s where China was effectively ungovernable, and the Japanese realized that and saw an opportunity to consolidate their position because of Chinese weakness.
The Japanese focused their attention on Manchuria and its rich raw materials. Earlier in the 20th century, Japan had acquired control of Manchuria's next-door neighbor, Korea. Japan had treaty rights to station troops along the railway line from Manchuria to the Korean border. It was a potentially explosive situation.
For the officers who ran the Japanese forces in Manchuria, there was never any doubt that Manchuria was vital to Japanese survival in the 1930s as a great state. Their real concern was that the presence of the Japanese in Manchuria was threatened all the time by the rise of Soviet Russia on the one hand, and by the growing anarchy in Chinese politics on the other. Caught between China and Russia, the Japanese soldiers in Manchuria were anxious to do something to secure Japanese interests.